We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages. Well, Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. A Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never.
Watch out, America. I guess porch pirates Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer just might be coming for your porches. Hello, my friends. Welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We've got an abbreviated show today where we're going to be sharing two interviews recorded just a few weeks ago at the leadership program of the Rockies retreat at the beautiful Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today, I'm joined by Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder and CEO of OpenTheBooks.com, and Dr. Carol Swain, who, among other credentials, was vice chair of President Trump's 1776 commission. In those interviews, we're going to be diving into the corruption going on financially across the country with government mismanagement of taxpayer dollars. That's what we'll be talking about with Adam Andrzejewski. And with Dr. Carol Swain, we will dive in today to the matter of critical race theory and American history being mistaught across the country. All that and much more is coming up on today's Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and we are getting started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, grateful for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Time now for another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Back with you today. It's a Tuesday, but we've got a new show for you nonetheless. Next week, we'll be back on Monday, and then the following Tuesday, the day after Independence Day, we will be broadcasting a show. And look, we've got some exciting stuff being worked on in terms of some remarkable guests, a great lineup. I don't want to share anything yet because we're still working on confirming dates and all of that, but we should have a congressional panel of 3 members of Congress. We should have a couple of folks on Hollywood wokeness who are in the know, and so much more coming up very soon here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, once again coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and it is so great to be with you as always. In just a few moments, we will get right to my interviews from the leadership program of the Rockies retreat in person together at that retreat. It was so great to actually be back face-to-face with folks, to see their smiling faces in person, which I also just did at the Western Conservative Summit this past weekend. We'll get to those interviews in just a moment. Want to encourage you, though, if you have not done so already, to please subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads to keep tabs on all of our content and more. You can also, and please do, follow our friends at the Washington Examiner at washingtonexaminer.com. In addition, don't forget now to subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, my interviews between the leadership program of the Rockies Retreat and the Western Conservative Summit with such luminary guests as Guy Benson, Dr. James Lindsay, former acting U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf, Andy Ngo, arguably America's foremost expert in Antifa, and more phenomenal guests. Subscribe today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts to the Jimmy at the Crossroads podcast. So I don't want to waste any time. I want to get right to it. But the theme of the leadership program of the Rockies retreat in Colorado Springs, June 4th and 5th, was Saving 1776, which is what we need to do each and every day in this country as we fight in the battle of ideas. Save 1776. Frankly, save 1789, too. That's, of course, the year that the Constitution was ratified and put into effect. That's what this is all about. That means being good stewards of America's taxpayer dollars and teaching American history and politics properly, as it should be. That's what we're promoting today in our conversations with Adam Andrzejewski of OpenTheBooks.com and Dr. Carol Swain. We're going to get to those two interviews starting right now.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Welcome back, Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I am Jimmy Sengenberger. Saving Freedom 1776. That's the theme of the leadership program of the Rockies 2021 retreat here at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Absolutely gorgeous down here, and we are interviewing with speakers at the conference, and I am so pleased to be joined today by Adam Andrzejewski, who is the founder of OpenTheBooks.com, and he's got a longer resume than that, but what he's doing in terms of exposing government corruption and money and how it's being mishandled at all levels of government is absolutely tremendous. Adam, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Well, it's great to be on the program, Jimmy. We call it a target-rich environment. That's the military term for this. And what we see at every level of government is just abject waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. Local people need to get engaged.
How did you get to founding OpenTheBooks.com? And how did it come about and why?
So after I had a liquidity event as a private sector entrepreneur in 2007, it was a heyday. So I was able to monetize a print Yellow Pages publishing company 1 year before Steve Jobs invented the iPhone.
Oh, wow.
So multiples were at an all-time high, never to return. And it's a lot of hard work, and the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I, at that point, dedicated my life to public service. I looked around for an issue. I settled on this issue that could make a real difference, that's transparency. I'm based in Illinois. My family on my mother's side's been there since 1844, and Illinois is the Super Bowl of corruption. And so I thought, well, if we could see everything in as real time as possible, then bad actors would start to self-censor their bad activities, and good people would be empowered. And so that's how we started with transparency. Every dime, online, in real time.
So you're talking about all sorts of levels of government. We're not just saying the federal government, there's state, there's local. How big of a problem is this? When we've got such a vast country, we've got 50 states, we've got the federal government, we've got Washington, D.C. How deep does it go?
Well, we are foremost on transparency in the history of America, in world history. We've built the world's largest private database of public sector expenditures. So that's nearly all federal, state, and local spending all the way across the country. So last year we filed 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. Wow. And we successfully compiled $6 trillion in federal, state, and local spending. So for instance, in your hometown, wherever it is across America, you can come to OpenTheBooks.com, and we have virtually every single public employee's salary and pension record in your unit of government, in your local units. And so you can review that and hold your elected officials accountable for the decisions that they're making.
Now, recently we talked on the radio about lifeguards in Los Angeles County. Just as one example of a very localized instance, talk to me about why I should really change careers.
So,
and
life's a
where
beach.
I live.
Yeah. Life's a beach when you're an LA County lifeguard. The top paid, we broke this in my column at Forbes with about 650,000 views. And then the Wall Street Journal ran my editorial on the top paid lifeguards in LA that make up to $392,000 a year. And so we found 81 of them make over 200 grand. 7 of them made over $300,000. We found a single lifeguard, Jimmy, in a 5-year period, made $630,000 on overtime alone. And so, you know, it gets a little worse. Since the last time we talked, we also found their retirement pension benefit. 30 years and out, at 30 years, as early as age 55, they can actually retire on 78% of their cash compensation for the rest of their life with cost of living adjustments.
It's absolutely astounding to me. I mean, sure, lifeguards have a lot that they have to do, but compare that to the other parts of the country.
Well, yeah. So in New York City, we found the top paid lifeguard made too much money, but it was $168,000. In Florida, the top paid lifeguard, too much money, but it was only $118,000. And that shows you the difference between, you know, big government states with a heavy boot on the neck of taxpayers like New York, like California, the pay, pension, and perks are out of control, versus well-run financial states like Florida, which the boot of government is a lot lighter on the private sector.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit more, Adam, about that differential between the big government states where the government's more heavily entrenched in the economy and in different aspects of life versus the lighter touch, because it would make sense to me that it just seems logical that the state with the lighter touch and less intrusive behaviors and activities would be a little bit better at spending the money, especially if they're very transparent about it.
Well, and people are voting with their feet, but what we do at OpenTheBooks.com is we put the hard data behind the reasons why they're fleeing high-tax states like New York and California. Here's a great set of data. It's very simple. California has about 400,000 highly compensated public employees. That salary, in our definition, is 100,000 or more. 400,000 of those people. New York has about 250,000 of six-figure public employees at every level. Florida has 50,000. Texas has 80,000. So right there, you see why Florida has more people than New York, but about 5 to 6 times fewer highly compensated six-figure public employees. Texas has 80,000 employees that make 6 figures or more. California has 400,000. And this is, people get a sense of this. And that's why they're fleeing these high-tax states like they're on fire.
Again, we're talking with Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder of OpenTheBooks.com. And Adam, every time, we've heard about financial malfeasance, and I don't mean like necessarily corrupt. Maybe there are many instances of that, but I mean just in terms of how things go under the radar and people aren't aware of how their tax dollars are being spent. But what you're doing at OpenTheBooks.com is really shining a light on these things. Just as I'm hearing you talk about, especially the salary component, let alone so many other things, it's mind-blowing.
It is. And so what we do at OpenTheBooks.com is we shine a white-hot spotlight on the waste and the fraud. For instance, red states like Texas, I'm not saying they don't have problems. They do. We uncovered that the very poor border community of Laredo, Texas, where the average household income is less than $20,000 per year, in a 3-year period, they paid their city manager position $1.9 million worth of cash compensation. And that is legal corruption. You've got Pasadena, Texas, and we just found that they paid their city attorney in the last year before retirement over $900,000. You've got Chandler, Texas, that in the last year before retirement, they paid their city manager over $800,000 on his way out the door. So this type of stuff, people need to be aware of this. And for city councils that instituted these pay policies, they need to be voted out.
Yeah, and now in terms of that accountability piece, Adam, voting people out, or maybe if it's really bad, doing recalls in states that allow recalls. Let's talk a little bit more about how to do that, whether it is from an election standpoint or maybe other ways of, say, you find something, you go to OpenTheBooks.com, you learn about what's going on in your city or community, and you're incensed about. What can people do in terms of shining that spotlight as well for their communities and trying to take some sort of action.
Right, you can educate your neighbors on the most salient issues of the day. I'm from Illinois, as we talked about, it's a Super Bowl of corruption. Our property taxes are some of the highest in the nation, and our property taxes primarily fund our schools. So we've got superintendents, we've got 7 Illinois superintendents out, retired, on lifetime public pensions, annually exceeding $300,000. That incenses people. It drives them absolutely crazy. We have, in Chicago, you've got tree trimmers that lop off $105,000 a year. And so, all of this is actionable intelligence. You take it to your neighbors, you galvanize local armories, and you insist on a new day.
As we begin to wrap up with you, Adam, when it comes to a website like openthebooks.com and how long ago did you found the organization again?
So the organization was founded in 2011, Illinois-centric, and one of the first things we found was a school district treasurer whose pay went from $164,000 to $296,000 the next year. He was eventually indicted, and he spent time in prison for converting his vacation and sick days into his pay.
So in the 10 years that you've been doing this, has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better? What's the dynamic shift over this past decade?
So at the federal level, I think with President Joe Biden proposing $6 trillion worth of new spending, it's brazen, it's stunning, and certainly that is a move in the wrong direction. With our national debt in 2008 at $10 trillion when Barack Obama came into office, after 8 years of Obama, Trump comes in at $18 trillion worth of national debt. After 4 years of Trump and a national pandemic, we've got $28 trillion. Biden passes the American Rescue Act, no Republican votes, only Democratic votes, $2 trillion. We're going north of $30 trillion on the national debt. The trajectory is not good.
And especially when so much of it is wasteful spending. I mean, there are a lot of programs that we could talk about whether or not they should be in existence. My view happens to be most federal programs shouldn't be in existence, should be cut away.
Well, and it's duplication nation.
That's it. That's what I was getting at, is a lot of it is duplication. A lot of it is, from my vantage point, constitutional questions about whether or not a program or a department should be in existence. But there's also the question of if you have such massive spending, there's so much waste that's going to get under the radar.
Well, and our team has found just recently, and we'll break news on your show, a $500,000 grant went for the hydrodynamics of defecation. A study on pandas and elephants and dogs and warthogs pooping.
The hydrodynamics of defecation?
Yes.
I've never thought I would hear that type of language.
They always dress it up, right? But at the end of the day, it stinks.
Yeah, it really does stink, doesn't it? Well played, well played. So Adam, before we let you go here, at the leadership program of the Rockies Retreat, what do you want people to know about how they can utilize openthebooks.com as a tool?
Come to our website. Look at your local units of government. We've got how-to videos on how to search it. Ask questions, demand answers of your local public officials, and hold them accountable for tax and spend decisions. Educate your neighbors. The second thing, when you're on our website, petition tab across the top, sign our petition to tell Congress to read the bill. 72-hour legislative timeout. We don't have a representative republic if our representatives don't have time to simply read the bill before they vote.
That's such a novel concept. One thing I wish we could do at the federal level, too. Here in Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, where I live, we have single-issue legislation. Now, sometimes there can be bills that have a lot, like an omnibus bill or things that can bring a bunch of components to it. But generally speaking, we're talking, maybe a few dozen pages at most, I think on average for a lot of pieces of
that's
legislation.
good policy.
Yeah, that's much better than the federal government with all these boondoggles and pork that get mixed in.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be, Foster Freeze, God bless his soul, he just passed away last Friday. His funeral memorial is in a couple of days. Foster Freeze advocated one subject, one bill at the federal level. It should be done.
Adam Andrzejewski with openthebooks.com. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Super. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on the program.
Definitely check out openthebooks.com.
Yes. Thank you.
Once again, Adam Andrzejewski joining us from openthebooks.com here on Jimmy at the Crossroads at the leadership program of the Rockies Retreat on Friday. the 4th of June. We're going to take a quick break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We've got more coming up. Stay tuned.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler.
Thanks for coming to this medical convention with me, Captain. You're a true friend.
You promised there'd be green women.
Well, I'd like you to meet some of my colleagues. This is Dr. Scholes, podiatrist.
How do you do?
And this is Dr. Pepper.
Gesundheit.
Oh, and here comes Dr. Phil. He's a psychiatrist.
Well, every pancake has two sides. And
You're right, Doc. He is boring.
I'm right here.
And this is Dr. Spock, child psychologist.
Goodgy.
And of course, this is Dr. Octopus.
Oh, hello. How do you do?
How do you do?
How do you do? Hi, give me 5. Pleased to meet you. Give me 5. How do you do?
You do.
So, Doc Ock, what's your field?
I am a proctologist.
Oh, I wish I hadn't shaken all 8 hands.
Well, did the captain bring enough hand sanitizer? Tune in next time when we hear...
And this is Dr. Quinn, medicine woman.
Finally, a woman.
Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya?
Ugh.
On Starship
Winkler.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us. F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hell Yeah Avenue and Dam Straight Street.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Continuing now, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy Sengenberger coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner at the leadership program of the Rockies retreat at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Saving Freedom 1776. And it is so apropos then, if we're trying to save freedom 1776 at this conference, that we would have on this program Dr. Carol Swain. She is an award-winning political scientist, a former professor of political science and professor of law at Vanderbilt University, and a lifetime member of the James Madison Society. As chairwoman of the 1776 Commission, Dr. Swain's work reflected and honored America's founding and was intended to serve as an education tool in contrast to the New York Times 1619 Project. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to get nearly as far as it should have. She's the author of 9 books. Dr. Carol Swain, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. It's great to have you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate what you're doing and what you were trying to do with the 1776 Commission, because we had Dr. Peter Wood on this program to delve into the 1619 Project a few months back, because it really is one of those instances in education of kids not getting the kind of introduction to American government and our founding that they should be. So talk to us about your passion for the year 1776, for the founding of this country and the basic principles of this country.
Well, I can tell you that before I was appointed to the 1776 Commission, I was involved with Bob Woodson's 1776 Unites, and we, that organization came into being in reaction to the 1619 Project, and what we wanted to do was provide an alternative and a truer perspective of America as a nation. And so that organization, 1776 Unites, was probably several months before the 1776 Commission.
That's right.
But the commission itself came out of an executive order by President Trump. He did the executive order in October 2020, and the commission met and was announced. The members were announced on December 18th, 2020. So by then, you know, the election had happened, and it was all this controversy, and it was clear by then they were calling Biden, you know, president-elect. So we met twice before we were dissolved by executive order. And we were able to put together a report that gave, just pretty much what we had hoped to do, how we saw the Declaration of Independence. And what we focused on, that was, the birth date of our nation. But even though the drafters of that document, they were imperfect men and women, as we all are, they put together and crafted a document that provided the basis, for the elimination of slavery. It took us through the world wars, the civil rights movement, and everything that has happened subsequently that helped define our nation. And if you think about the blacks that came out of slavery and Black America, they have always, believed in the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And so when Dr. Martin Luther King talked about America living up to its ideals and judging people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, it was in line with who we are as an American people. And so what we wanted to do with that 1776 Unites as well as the 1776 Commission was to provide an alternative to the anti-Americanism of the 1619 Project.
Yeah, well, you talk about the early Black Americans, like Frederick Douglass, for example.
And Booker T. Washington is my favorite because he's a Virginian like me. He was a Virginian.
Absolutely. And so Frederick Douglass, though, and I've talked about him quite a bit, especially his speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, where he talks about the saving principles of the Declaration of Independence. And that was a time when slavery, it was I think, 1854. Slavery was around. He was lucky to be, a freed man by that point, but just barely from slavery into freedom, and had the opportunity to then go live his life. And he was saying, look, the United States is falling short of its principles. They are still saving principles. They're not false as the 1619 projects would suggest. And he talked about the glorious liberty document in all caps of the U.S. Constitution.
Yes.
How do we get from that to where we are today?
Well, I can tell you that that people with political agendas have decided to politicize America's past for power. And so it involves demonizing the country with rhetoric and a narrative that will destroy us unless we do successfully push back against it. And if you look at the situation of the newly freed slaves and their relationship with white America, you have to keep in mind that there were always abolitionists. There were always white people fighting for the elimination of slavery. And after emancipation occurred, it was white people, you think about the Rosenwald family, that set up schools across the South to educate the newly freed slaves. The colleges and universities, the black colleges and universities, they were set up by white people's philanthropy, trying to make amends for slavery. And Booker T. Washington, his autobiography, Up From Slavery, it tells his story, his struggle to get education and his success, but also how he was able to fund Tuskegee Institute. And I understand now that there's a revisionism going on that says that Up From Slavery is a work of fiction. And so is the Tuskegee Institute that we could drive to Alabama and, actually physically visit, the university now. What do you do with that if Up From Slavery all of a sudden is a work of fiction? Is the Institute itself a work of fiction? Does it exist?
It is unfathomable how we get to this point, Dr. Carol Swain, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. As we have a few minutes left with you, as I was telling you before we started our conversation, I ran for several years a nonprofit called the Liberty Day Institute, and we were in public schools. We were educating fifth graders in particular on the U.S. Constitution, American government, providing Constitution booklets and teaching resources from thanks to generous foundation grants and so forth. We reached hundreds of thousands of fifth graders. I spoke to many dozens of fifth grade classes, and the number one thing that I kept hearing from educators was that they lacked resources. And it's so disheartening that when resources are now starting to come to the fore, it's something like the 1619 project that they're bringing in more into the classrooms. How do we combat, and how can parents combat effectively against the 1619 project and its revisionist history approach to America?
Well, I can tell you that the 1776 commission that was dissolved by President Biden, we reconvened in late May. And one of the things that we decided is that we're going to have a website, with resources on it. But we also are going to encourage people in every state to set up their own 1776 commissions and to engage in grassroots activism. And so we applauded the fact that there were legislators in a number of states that had put forth bills designed to counter critical race theory. And they were using, a sophisticated, many of them, model that didn't name it critical race theory. It just described the actions that they were engaged in, that are anti-American, anti-civil rights, anti-equal protection clause. So we were encouraging that to take place. And part of what the 1776 Commission report, as well as a book that was published with a new introduction by me, Larry Arnn, and Matthew Spalding, one of the things that we encouraged people to do is, for teaching civic education, is to go back to those original documents. People need to read the original documents, and we very much emphasize the need for strong families, because we know that the family is like the backbone of civilization. Part of what the political left, the critical theory, what they're trying to do is destroy families. But families are important, as well as our Judeo-Christian values and principles. All of those things are things that we view as very important. The 1776 Commission report, again, it's a book that you can order now. It has a new introduction, and I think that that would give people some ideas. But we believe that money for resources is out there. There are some political action groups that are organizing. There are people that are writing curriculums. Hillsdale College has a curriculum for K through 12, as well as the Woodson Center has a curriculum. So we're out there putting out resources that people can present as an alternative to 1619, which is a work of fiction.
And final question for you, Dr. Swain, and so appreciate your time here at the LPR retreat today. Are you optimistic or pessimistic at this point, given how far gone we have become, especially with the 1619 project, with the Biden administration having a grant program that they want to put into place to advance 1619 in schools? Are you optimistic or pessimistic, especially based on the groundswell of grassroots support for our nation's founding documents and principles that the 1776 Commission and others have gotten?
Well, first of all, I believe that critical race theory and fighting it is the civil rights issue of our times. I'm optimistic because people are rising up and fighting back, and they're fighting. They own strong ground when it comes to principle. When you look at the civil rights legislation that's been passed nationally as well as in many states, when you read the Constitution, they're on solid ground. And one thing about America is that we all know that we don't shame people or bully them because of the color of their skin. And if it's unacceptable to be done to racial and ethnic minorities, it's unacceptable to be done to white people. And so I am optimistic. I do believe it's a time that that racial and ethnic minorities like me need to lock arms with our white brothers and sisters and lead the movement, because some people have lost their voice. But fortunately, white people are finding their voice on this issue. And the way to be effective is to always center it around principles.
Exactly.
Principles. Stay principle-based. And I think we can win this. It's ludicrous what they're doing.
It's an American issue and an American battle, regardless of race,
Yes.
ethnicity, religion, what have you. That is the crux of the matter, to be sure.
Yes, and I think that we will prevail. I believe the political left has overplayed its hand, but I didn't expect that something just so un-American could have gotten as far as it has, and how it has impacted every institution of our society, including our military and intelligence agencies, and even now, even within the medical field, there are Harvard-educated doctors saying that they need to give preferential treatment to minority emergency room patients over whites. This is crazy. This is insane. And I think that we need to right the wrongs as far as just going back to sound judgment, values, and principles. There's one race, the human race, and we stand or fall together.
On those saving principles about which Frederick Douglass was such a strong advocate. Dr. Carol Swain, thanks so much for taking the time here at the Leadership Program of the Rockies Retreat. Appreciate your advocacy at this important time and your time today.
Thank you.
Once again, Dr. Carol Swain joining us in person at the Leadership Program of the Rockies Retreat on June 4th of this year, just a few weeks ago. And such a profoundly important topic, educating our youth and all Americans accurately on the basic founding principles, ideas, ideals, and history of this country. So critical. Definitely encourage you to check out Dr. Swain's work, as well as openthebooks.com, our conversation earlier with Adam Andrzejewski, founder and CEO of openthebooks.com, because make no mistake, it is critical that we have a federal government and state and local governments that are good stewards of American taxpayer dollars. Well, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you again in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Next Monday, we will be back with a new episode, back in the timely fashion, too, of about 11 a.m. Mountain Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, be sure to check out the Jimmy at the Crossroads podcast. My thanks to guests Adam Andrzejewski and Dr. Carol Swain, to our partners at the Washington Examiner, and most especially, of course, to you for watching, subscribing, listening, and sharing all of our content here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Have a great rest of your week. We will be back again next Monday. And as always, may God bless America.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense.